Peace Mennonite. I am Asia Fry, and this is my daughter, Abby Fry, and we are going to bring today's teaching from Luke chapter 2 about the boy Jesus in the temple. And our text today, Jesus is 12 years old, and my daughter, Abby, is 12 years old. And so I asked really nicely for her to help me with our teaching today. In our teaching, Jesus sits down and talks with the temple experts. And I think it maybe is a little presumptuous to think that I'm an expert, or maybe that you're a lot like Jesus, but I thought it would be fun to do this as a conversation like Jesus may have done in the temple. Cool. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to take us through this scripture and point out some things that maybe aren't clear in the text, some background stuff, and then invite you to, you can interrupt me anytime you have questions or comments. As we do this, I would like you to think about, all of us to think about what potentially is the purpose of this text. So this is the only account we have in our canonical Bible of Jesus in childhood. We have the infant Jesus and we have the adult Jesus, but only here in this really short passage, Luke 2:41, do we have Jesus as a teenager. And so I wonder why it is that the author or editor of Luke felt like it was theologically important to include this.
Right.
Okay, so we're gonna just talk through it and talk about purpose.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. We have done a few takes of this, so we're ready to go at this point. Okay. Now Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem every year for the feast of Passover. Do you remember what the Passover is?
Yes, it's when the Israelites were freed, and they had to mark the sheep's blood over their doors so that the Holy Spirit wouldn't steal their children.
Right. So it's when the Israelites were in bondage in Egypt, and the plagues came, and this was one of the
grasshoppers.
Yeah, and this was the plague of the death of the firstborn, and if you marked with the lamb's blood, then your house got passed over. So that was probably maybe even 1,000 years before the time of Jesus, and they're still celebrating the Passover. So Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem every year for the feast of Passover. That means this is at least the 12th time Jesus has done this.
Right.
If Mary and Joseph are observant Jews, likely they would have gone up to Jerusalem more often than that. But Jesus has done this at least 12 times.
Right.
When he was 12 years old, they went up according to custom. But when the feast was over, as they were returning home, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. His parents did not know it. To me, that sounds like he stayed on purpose.
Yeah. So one speculation that I've had was maybe that he's done this multiple times. He's stayed behind, tried to stay at the church, chill out with the church people multiple times, and then he's just got caught every time.
So you think Jesus has been for years trying to stay at the temple?
Yeah. And then just this time, he finally made a plan that he was sneaky enough to stay in the temple and not get caught.
Do you think just like Jerusalem was that much more fun than Nazareth?
I don't know. I've never been to Nazareth.
Okay, Nazareth is a small town like McPherson.
Cool.
And Jerusalem is big town like
Wichita.
Maybe, yeah, or Kansas City. So Jesus' parents didn't know it, but because they assumed that he was with their group of travelers, they went a day's journey. Then they began to look for him among their relatives and acquaintances. So Mary and Joseph weren't being negligent here. First of all, Jesus is 12.
Right.
So he's not quite like an adult by customs of the time, but like he's on the cusp of that. And a lot like you, you're not an adult, but I'll let you bake a cake at the house or something, right? And they would have traveled with their whole clan. They would have come up to Jerusalem to do Passover for several days, and then it would have been time to depart and go home. And I think it was pretty reasonable for Mary and Joseph to expect that Jesus would do what he was supposed to do, that he would be with the clan, that he was with the other children or kinspeople or townspeople that they were traveling with.
Right.
I mean, like, if we were on vacation and I expected you to get in the car with your aunt and then come home, and we got home and you weren't in the car, I'd be really angry, right?
Right.
Yeah. So they went down. When they didn't find him, they returned to Jerusalem to look for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple courts, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking questions. So this says 3 days. They walked out one day, and then they walked back one day, and then they searched a third day.
Right.
Or, it's not clear, they could have been in Jerusalem searching for him for 3 days.
Right. I mean, like, that's another reason why they might have, one of the first places they may have looked was the church, is because Jesus had tried to sneak off there multiple times.
Well, it doesn't say the first place they looked was the church, so
but, like,
says,
but it was, like, quick enough. It was like they still looked at the church. I mean, like, do you go, like, if I went missing, would you go look at the church?
It would not be one of the first places I looked.
Would it be one of the places ever that you looked?
I'd look until I found you.
That's true.
One time, Abby's sister Ellie and two of her best friends went missing for about 30 minutes. They were like 5, 6, and 7, and I had sent them to the snow cone stand. And they were supposed to just walk over and then come home, and they didn't. And I lost them for about half an hour, and I freaked out.
She did. She freaked out.
And when we figured out where they were when we got them home, it was this weird mixture of both really angry and so thankful and relieved. And I wonder, do you think that's something Mary and Joseph may have been feeling on their day walk back to Jerusalem? Like, what do you think they maybe felt?
They were probably really anxious, like, as it speaks in later, that they were, because, like, they were like, what happened to this child? Also, if we somehow, like, let this child of God, like, and he died because of our actions,
You think
there's gonna be something very wrong?
Do you think there's some pressure there? And Mary's like, this is the Son of God, and I lost him. Okay, I think that's a good point. Okay, so they get back to Jerusalem, they find him, and here Jesus is. He's among the teachers, listening and asking them questions. And that would be something similar to this, similar to Socratic dialogue.
Right.
That's the most common teaching method of the ancient world. So that would have been normal.
Right.
But except that they were astonished, as we see here, and all who heard Jesus were astonished at his understanding and at his answers.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's 12, he wouldn't have begun formal training in the synagogue yet. When his parents saw him, they were overwhelmed. His mother said to him, "Child, why have you treated me like this? Look, your father and I have been looking for you anxiously."
Why were you searching for me? Did you not know that I must be in my father's house?
Yet his parents did not understand the remark he made to them. I think if I had looked for you for 3 days and you were missing, and I found you and you gave me a glib response, it maybe wouldn't go over well. Like, how do you think Mary took this?
Like, I think she was astonished. Like, the people, like,
Child. And she uses a word here that means child and not son. So Jesus then did go down with them and went home to Nazareth. Mm-hmm. He was obedient to them, but his mother kept all these things in her heart. I'm reminded of when the angel Gabriel came to Mary and said, and told her that she would be bearing a child, the Son of God. And do you remember what Gabriel said to her at that point? I don't. That's okay. But, I'm sorry. Do you remember what it said about her heart at that point?
That it would make her heart happy?
No, it said that she treasured all these things in her heart.
Oh.
And then she sings that song, the Magnificat, about how Jesus will overthrow tyrants and the systems of the world. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because Mary did know. Yeah. So it says that earlier that she treasured these things in her heart. And here, in the next chapter, it says she kept all these things in her heart. And I was thinking about, when you go to bed and you kind of like mull on something, turning it over and over and over. Do you do that? I wonder. So the angel comes to Mary and says, "Hey, listen, you're going to bear God's child, right?"
Right.
And then in the chapter before this, she brings Jesus to the temple, and this guy Simeon says something like, "Oh, this is about 174." Okay, listen carefully. This child is destined to be the cause of falling and rising of many in Israel, and to be a sign that will be rejected. Indeed, as a result of him, the thoughts of many hearts will be revealed, and a sword will pierce your own soul as well. And so I keep thinking about this talk about Mary cherishing things in her heart being pierced, her very being. I wonder if she wanted to keep Jesus.
Yeah, maybe she was like, I know this is the Son of God, but like, I have a connection with him, and he's also my son, and I don't want to be selfish, but I want to keep this boy to me.
So that would be a reason to worry things over in your heart.
Like, Jesus died on the cross pretty young, like 30 or something.
Yeah.
So it's like that's like 7 years younger than you.
Yeah.
And I think me and like your parents would be really sad if you died at that time.
So then this ends, and Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and with people. Okay, talk to me about what's your impressions here about what is this text doing? Why is it here? What is the theological significance of the text?
I think it's supposed to kind of humanize Jesus, but like at the same time, it speaks about how like after 3 days they found him sitting in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening and asking them questions, and all who heard him were amazed by understanding his answers. So they were both trying to humanize him, but reminding him at the same time that he was the Son of God and that he had great power.
Yeah, I think that's workable, because so the beginning, the connection to Passover. So we talked about Passover. Why do you think, like, 1,000 years later, they're still celebrating Passover?
Kind of like how we celebrate 4th of July. It freed them. They're celebrating that liberation.
Yeah, I think that this idea of liberation had to be really powerful, especially because they're like, you can't underestimate when you're reading the New Testament how much the oppression of Rome and the Roman occupying forces like colors everything.
Right.
So these are an oppressed people in their own place. So celebrating that previous liberation from empire makes a lot of sense. But so I think there's a connection here, connecting Jesus to that idea of liberation. Maybe that even Jesus is a new liberation. But yeah, we've just spent the last several chapters with heavenly beings and divine births and prophecies. And in the chapter following this, Jesus is going to get baptized and go in the wilderness, and there's these temptations. And the tempter comes to Jesus and is whisking him around to high mountains on the tops of the temple. Those are supernatural events. And this event is really mundane.
Right.
There's nothing, this could be any boy.
Right.
So maybe that tension between humanity and divinity is here. What else? What else do you pull out of this that you think is, well, why is this here?
To say, like, again, with, like, making him human. Like, yes, he is the Son of God. He has his powers. He amazes these people. He's a prophet. But also, like, his parents, they love him. They're scared that he might get lost somewhere. He could have been hurt. Stuff like that.
I do tend to read this story from Mary's perspective. From that place, I think, of deep fear and worry of loss. And I think that, that speaks to where, like, I am right now in the world, in deep fear and worry of loss. And Mary's reaction to that is to ponder it in her heart. Do you remember what I told you about ancient writing? So
Yes.
in modern writing, what are the most important?
So the very beginning, the topic sentence, the very end, the summarizing sentence.
Right. You're in junior high, you have to write a lot of paragraphs, you need a topic sentence, and you need a summary,
Mhm.
and that's like where the point of your
Right.
text is.
But then in ancient writing, it talks about how the middle
Mhm.
is the most important part.
Often, right?
Right.
So sometimes ancient writers, a lot of times ancient writers will use brackets.
Mhm.
And this could easily be a bracket. Because look at this. So Jesus is in the temple for Passover.
Mhm.
Do you remember another time that Jesus was in Jerusalem for Passover?
I don't.
Okay, so the Last Supper.
Right, the Last Supper. Oh, right, the Last Supper.
That whole Holy Week thing.
Yeah, and then the research, and then leading up to his death.
Yeah, so Jesus is in Jerusalem for Passover when he's handed over to the authorities and crucified. And so Luke could be using this as a bookend. Here's the young Jesus showing wisdom, connecting to the Passover and salvation at the beginning of Luke. And then at the end we have,
Right.
especially because Luke's original ending is basically right after the crucifixion. It doesn't have the resurrection account yet.
Right. And you spoke to me earlier about
Mhm.
how you kind of thought like the main important part of this text was the part where he's amazing all the scholars and stuff.
Right, so...
And
wait. So let's tell them.
Okay.
Okay, so the beginning, it says Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem. We know that setting. The end of this pericope is that, and Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and with people. So maybe the ending is bringing that emphasis to wisdom.
Right.
And what appears to me to be the middle verse here is all who heard Jesus were astonished at his understanding answers. So I think I think it could be emphasizing that Jesus is wise.
Right. But then I thought that was a good theory, but my theory is that the most important part, the part that really grounds this text, is when Mary and Joseph find Jesus and they talk to him, they yell at him, they make it like it just really shows a kind of emotion that you don't normally see in the Bible.
And I think we a lot of times read it without the emotion.
Yeah.
Well, and it's significant that he's in the temple. They
Yes.
find Jesus in the temple.
So so yes, it might be, it's kind of closer to the end, but I feel like that, and it's not the rank middle like 47 would be, but it's
Yeah.
yeah.
You had a point about the temple.
Mhm.
Would you like to?
I don't.
That's okay.
Yeah.
So, Judaism.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus is clearly in the tradition of the prophets and the teachings, and Jesus, like, this is written to a Gentile audience, but it's written to Gentiles that are very familiar with Judaism.
Right.
And so the author of Luke is clearly setting Jesus in this context of the temple here.
Right.
And I think saying that Jesus has authority in the temple because of
Right.
his wisdom. So, the Gospel of Luke is written, so the temple was the center of Judaism.
Right.
The center of Jewish worship. It was the house of God.
Right.
And you talked about the Bible Project video you had seen.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I talked about how Jesus in the Bible Project video, it talks about how the temple was Jesus, or Jesus was the temple, but also Jesus worshipped in the temple. And so this is grounding how like, Jesus worships in the temple and how he is the temple, but his parents, that's why they find him in the temple.
Right. So this is being written in AD 70 or CE 70,
Right.
roughly 40 years after Jesus is crucified.
Right.
The temple in Jerusalem is destroyed.
Right.
And this is devastating to the Jewish people
Right.
because it's the center of their worship, it's the center of their religion. And they have to figure out what to do.
Right.
And so some move worship to the synagogues, just the smaller, temples,
Mhm.
right? Not the big temple. Some of them center Judaism and the law and the teachings and the rabbis. And the Messianic Jews that become Christians, say that Jesus is now the center of the faith. And so it's after the destruction of the temple that really the split of what becomes modern Judaism and what becomes modern Christianity, it's after the destruction.
Right.
And so I wonder, this is being written 10 to 15 years after that.
Right.
And so I'm wondering about the early audience that, as the author is collecting the information to put in this history, because so Mark is the oldest gospel,
Mm-hmm.
and Luke and Matthew both follow the outline, and they share some of the they share some material, but this
Right.
material is unique to Luke.
Right.
So as Luke is collecting the histories for Luke and Acts, and this is undoubtedly part of the oral tradition, and as he's collecting that, I wonder if he puts it in because his early audience, he's making the case that Jesus is the new temple.
Right.
Right? That's what I think.
Yeah.
When we read a text like this, I ask myself what it reveals to me about how I need to be living. You know, instead of just not only having the scholarly pursuit of understanding, but also that's orthodoxy, but orthopraxy, the sort of right living aspects. What takeaways do you have? Don't stay at the temple.
Maybe like stay with the group.
Stay with the group. We should use this at camp. I don't know. What else? What other?
Maybe listen to your mom.
Yes.
We should use this a daily at home.
That's clearly the message. Teens, listen to your mom. Well, I come back. I think the claim this is making.
Right.
Okay, I think this is making a claim, and the claim is that Jesus is both human and divine, is a teacher set in the context and history of wisdom, the temple, and Judaism itself. So
wait, so he's kind of,
okay. So in summary, if we're going to talk about the purpose of this passage, I think it's making the claim that Jesus is a wise teacher in the context of Judaism and the temple that has authority. And so rather than, so that now in the absence and destruction of the temple, we should worship Jesus. I think that's where this is going.
Okay.
So maybe the takeaway is that we're not physically at our churches right now, right? I mean, yeah, we're in the house, and we haven't been to church in months, the physical body building church.
Right.
And so I wonder if there's something to be said about the absence of our building and the absence of their building, and how what they did is focus on the person and character of Jesus.
Right. Interesting.
Okay, well, thank you for joining Abby and I as we looked at some questions surrounding this text in Luke 2. If you have your own questions, you can email your pastor, Joanna. She'll be coming back from vacation. And thanks for letting us join you this week.